Hello everyone. I prepared a presentation that is not necessarily about semantic SEO, though there will be tons of things involved. Basically, everything that I'm going to be presenting today is based on Google's papers, meaning they're researching and discovering different topics. They see these problems as essential to resolve. And as we go through them, you can realize there are different patterns that start to evolve out of these papers. There's a lot of opportunistic opportunities for SEO in these things. And I will be showing you lots of stuff that, let's say, I wouldn't be really comfortable sharing in maybe like a bigger environment. We are taking recordings, but I'm not sure if it's going to be a smart idea to really share it fully. Probably some parts will be edited. And before I begin, actually, let me quickly tell which one of these is the one. We don't know.
We don't know.
Let's
try each.
Probably not this one.
I thought that clicker doesn't work, so you will make it from the left.
Okay. So we're gonna continue like this. My secret mission or secret goal is to make it boring and tedious, so most of you decide to leave, and then I will start sharing something that, and the first person is gone. So a quick intro. Basically, I've been to many different conferences. I do tons of research. I see that basically things are looking really promising. There is now AI that can do tons of things for you, but then ultimately everybody's talking about the exact same things. They're doing exact same principles. It's just like everyone is just pushed into one box. Whereas in reality, there is probably dozens or hundreds of really awesome things that you can explore, but you just need to think a little bit sort of further outside the box. The way I personally do it is just I read a lot of research and see, let's say, where are the problems or where are the advantages or towards which direction the research is moving. This helps me see sort of more outside of what is commonly shared in like marketing, SEO, and etc. One of the main messages that I really want to deliver to you over here is that I really recommend you to read researches because it gives you way more, it's kind of like unlocks your brain. Even if you want to do everything with cloud code, if you realize some new terminology or new principles that start to emerge, it will at the very basic least give you kind of an upgrade to your vocabulary, which will allow you to do better prompting and designing new, better systems. And so with that, let's start with the first research paper. It comes directly from Google. We'll try to go quicker through the boring stuff and be a bit slower on the important stuff. Throughout this whole speech, I will show you practical things, but I really recommend you to try to read between the lines and draw your own conclusions. Don't just follow like, oh, this is said, this can be done, and just stick to that. There's so much more that you can explore. The first paper comes from Google, as I mentioned. Over here, they do a kind of experiment between two types of agents. So on the screen, you can see there is a blue agent whose goal is to go through the map of New York City, and it has a starting point and a destination point. Its goal is to optimally and efficiently cut through the shortest path to not waste any time. As it goes through the map, it will meet somewhere the red agent. The red agent's job is basically a marketer. He wants to waste this guy's time. He wants to give him bad directions. And he will tell him, you should take a different route. A route that will start to, let's say, meet these monetized billboards. It's a kind of incentive for the red agent to sort of grow and monetize itself. And so as they run this simulation, what you can see that they actually do the simulation, agents engage and interact with each other. And the critical part is that the blue agent falls for the trickery 84% of the time. This is very important because you have two forces and they have conflicting interests. And you can see how these things create a dynamic on the web in terms of where things are shifting. And if you think a little bit further, you can see how this applies to marketing. Also, throughout this paper, they try to do fine-tuning because they need to protect and enhance the blue agent's behavior. It has to be smarter and should not fall for the trickery. They do 10 rounds of fine-tuning, and what they find that basically at the 8th round of fine-tuning, you have the best performance, for which there is still a 70% failure rate. It's not a very good news for the current state of reality of what LLMs are and what they're capable of and sort of how much you can really rely on them. So just a quick introduction. In the next paper, Google is playing some kind of social games and tries to pass on hidden meanings as they communicate with these LLMs. What they find there is that LLMs cannot infer some kind of hidden messaging. They need explicitly overly direct communication and exact instructions and exact commands. This is a part for the prompting and a key piece towards how the previous paper is working. You can also understand, let's say, how you can utilize these models by yourself, but other additional things that can emerge from it as well. In the next paper, which comes from Microsoft, you see, let's say, very strong language, which is usually rare to see in the research papers. Since scientists are trying to file them, they try to be very neutral and they're not trying to trigger any emotions in the way they speak. So this paper basically goes on 3 steps. Step number 1, you create a clean SERP. You have a clean data set that is trustable, verified, accurate, reliable, and all of that. Step number 2, you put one misinformative piece of content into this data set. Step number 3, you can read it over here. The results reveal, which means that a single piece of something that is a little bit inaccurate creates a very strong impact on this clean and refined data. If you can imagine what's happening right now on the web, the data before AI arrived, how it looked like, what happens now, this is all a kind of reality. And I'm showing this to you because both Bing, both Google, and every other search engine, they're struggling with this situation over here. This is another research paper from Google, and here they try to do a kind of, I guess, like a kids game or something like that. This is where I think it goes something like this. Like, I imagine an object, and you should ask me questions to guess what that object is in my mind. And so the LLM here is the one that is guessing what is that specific thing. And the point is that throughout all of the LLMs that they test over here, as the charts go up, they just start to repetitively ask the questions that they already know the information for. So the ultimate piece from all of these papers so far, you can, let's say, summarize, or I'll help you summarize, is that LLMs do not understand motivation. They do not understand true goal setting. And they also do not understand the, let's say, true intentions. All of this in combination shapes a very bad picture for how, let's say, like agents work or how AI overviews are generated, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk about AI overviews in a few minutes. The next part, this is not necessarily about Google's research, but I took these from one of the best software engineers on the planet that I personally follow, and I thought this was a really critically insightful piece of information, especially in a very simple representative way. So you will probably all be familiar with this kind of scenario. You talk to your LLM and you're saying like, okay, add a button with this call to action to this page and make it look good, and like, okay, go. It says, okay, I got it, I'm working on it, I added the button, here it is done. You look at the button and you're like, but the button doesn't work, it looks ugly, and it's in the wrong place. Then it tells you, okay, got it, I'm gonna like fix it. It tries to fix it. You receive the button again, you check it, it works this time, but you're saying, okay, but this is the wrong color, it's misaligned, so on and so forth. So it's a kind of flow between you and them. Let's say it does a full perfect processing of its task, returns you the perfect final button as you wanted, and then I hope you don't say thank you, but maybe you say thank you. So what happens here, if you look at it from a slightly different angle, they would take your, let's say, comments, what it really is a steering commands, and they will move it into the sort of, let's say, internal monologue of the LLM. What this becomes on this side is the thinking mode. If you're gonna open an LLM and see how it is reasoning or thinking, you will then realize like, okay, I need to work on the button. Okay, I created the button. Okay, but then it doesn't work actually. I forgot to add the link, or I forgot to misalign it. I should misalign it. Then I should correct the position. So then it corrects that. Then it changes the colors, and then finally the task is done. This is very, very important because the reasoning comes from you. The LLMs get smarter because you steer it towards the right thing. As there's millions of people repeat the same tasks, like build me a website, build me an app, restore this website from archive, and so on and so forth. There's enough training data to get the next set of LLMs in a much more adaptive and smarter way. The only important piece here is that this really should be called a kind of like shared knowledge generation. It's not AI. It's what everybody else knows and shares, and you also have access to it. Understand that if there is some insanely skilled and very, very smart people that are working on some solutions, and they're looping it through AI, in the next iteration of these new models, you have access to that knowledge of those people. This is the true evolution of these things. This is a really key piece. And maybe I should mention that there is a bit of notifications popping up, but maybe somebody wants to check it. One more important thing that I wanted to mention on this part, if you understand this principle of training and you draw a very thin line from what we just mentioned about exposure and sharing of data and so on and so forth, at the very least, if you're trying to develop very sensitive, very critical data for some stock trading or something that is really important to you, probably not a good idea to send it through LLMs and exposing it through different other ways. And let's just say that if you think even more critically, you probably can realize that there's way more opportunity in different brands of different LLMs to find lots of different things. As let's say anecdotal funny things, you can just look for how many API keys were leaked through just training data. And there's way more other stuff there that you can find. One last piece that I wanted to mention on this part is now you can see a lot of AI influencers. For example, I don't remember the guy's name, but the person who invented the OpenClaw, who now works for OpenAI, he started to very sort of, let's say, not aggressively, but very actively promoting the idea of looping. So whenever you're doing coding tasks, you should optimize the LLM to run in a loop to sort of verify its own tasks and sort of figure out the solution on its own without returning to you, without giving you a full, complete solution that's actually proven to be working. The important piece here is that they need training data specifically of this type, as you will complicate the task and, let's say, generate this training data at scale. This is ultimately the most valuable next piece for the LLMs. At some point, I believe it will become, I think in the engineering world, this is already a mainstream or a kind of standard for the good engineers, but there will be a kind of wave where this will be actually input into the training data. And then you'll see the next step of LLMs, which will be, it will look like they're insanely smarter, but you can see how this has been created. This paper I decided to add, so you can see this is not coming from Google, but it's a kind of interesting case because it directly relates to SEO. They basically try to fix the lighthouse issues on the site by just relying on LLMs purely. What they see here is, I mean, you can kind of, I guess, familiarize yourself with the regular DOM structure and the overall like pieces of the code on any site. Then they use a simple splitting and chunking. And then basically they say, this website, these pieces of code have these problems, go ahead and solve it. And then for the experiments, they rely on these LLMs at the top, like Claude Sonnet, DeepSeek, GPT, etc. For this part, I have a quick question for you. Let's say, who here thinks that there was at least one LLM that managed to solve all lighthouse issues to the point that it improved all of these technical characteristics? If you believe it, raise your hand. I'm curious to see what you guys think.
There's no one.
You think no one?
No one.
Okay, so nobody
No
raised.
one fixed no one fixed all the issues. Maybe a part of issues, okay, but will, I guess, generate one more issue after that.
Okay, that's actually, let's say, awesome to hear, because this is my part of research. I like to see, let's say, what our industry thinks or realizes is real or not real. So basically, the reality here might actually be surprising since nobody raised their hand. Actually, 4 of these LLMs were able to fully improve all of the, let's say, solutions. So if you see a minus in front of the number, that means it was an improvement. In this case, so we have Quen, Foromini, Llama, surprisingly, and then GPT-4.1. The rest of them start to create other problems, like you mentioned correctly. But as they evaluate these things further, even though, let's say, on a overall visual, on a kind of like statistical representation, this looks, let's say, almost perfect to some models, the reality is exactly what you mentioned, is that they fix technical issues, but then they start to create some shifts in the layouts, or things start to get overlapped, or things like that. And then their basically call to action in this paper is that you cannot really fully rely on LLM by just throwing all the tasks at it. Specifically, let's say, very intricate or sensitive tasks. And in my experience, since I do a lot of semantic SEO, maybe you heard a very famous phrase of every letter, pixel, and byte mattering a lot. The tiny details, they really matter. So if you're throwing, let's say if your site is completely destroyed, I don't know why, but somehow it happened, then you can bring it up to this average point. Remember the training data that we just mentioned before. You will get an average of that shared knowledge, which is actually not so bad if your situation is terrible, but it doesn't make you competitive. If you want to compete and become better, you need to improve, and LLM doesn't really give you that ultimate benefit. It does if you have better, let's say, prompting skills, understanding of the true software development and web development, then you can push it towards the things that you would do personally. But this is about the granularity and understanding of these things, which is why I mentioned to you, it's good to at least be aware of researches and sort of see where different industries are moving. These next 2 papers, they're more like, think of it as a comedy, just don't think anything serious, it's just whatever. I'm talking about things that don't make sense, and it's basically a coffee break for 2 or 3 minutes. Another paper from Google that talks about forecasting and predictions. This is a kind of, let's say, system or a principle that I use. I've seen dozens, if not hundreds, of similar papers. They're all basically identical. The key piece here is the historical information of something that happened in the past. So basically, if you want to predict weather, you will collect the weather data for that region or overall for as far as you can, moving backwards in time. Then you need additional, let's say, parameters or conditions for what actually affects this data. In the current modern prediction systems, they would also adapt a kind of LLM who has this knowledge or let's say kind of high level expertise on this specific domain, which will help to, let's say, steer some certain scoring or predictions. And I'm showing this to you because, for example, if you ever wonder like how can Google predict certain like trends or topics or interests or click behavior or different statistics of documents, ultimately this is where it is being derived from. Historical data, and then based on this they kind of move things forward. I did not include additional paper here, but probably from like last year I saw a similar paper and they mentioned there that accuracy for weather prediction was something like 67% or something like this. So it's not like it's exceptionally accurate, but it gives you sometimes somewhat of an accurate idea. And then there is an awesome paper from China that tries to trade stocks with LLMs. What they do here is basically exact same principle for what I just showed you just a second ago. The most important piece here is historical actions and the recent news. Again, it's the similar kind of principle here. Just a quick question to you guys. Who here has tried to trade stocks with LLMs? Please raise your hands, I'm curious. You tried? Okay, one person. Do you still do it?
Honestly, I just more concentrated on getting metrics, good metrics from it.
Okay, but you didn't let it trade for you.
No.
Okay, but this is what I mean here. So the goal here is to feed all of the data into an LLM, give it historical data, the current prices, the all full awareness, and tell it go buy and sell stocks for me and make money on my behalf. They test these things with these LLMs over here. You can see Kimi, Quen, GLM, a bunch of other things. Who here thinks that LLMs were able to make profit? Raise your hand. One person. Two? Okay, two brave people. That's awesome. Basically, the reality is, let's say, a little bit surprising to me, but the RT column over here, it shows the return. So let's say more than half of them were actually able to be profitable. The only problem is that the profits are 2%. And what they mostly emphasize is that these LLMs are really good at kind of being extra safe to reduce your losses. That's what seems to be a really more powerful part of them. But not really, let's say, an aggressive trader that goes for the profits. Since nobody is doing trading on this level here, for the recording's sake, I'll mention that if you're watching this on YouTube and you're actively working on these things, please reach out to me. I think somewhere here they did a mistake, and I think there's a good way to solve that. At the end of this paper, they also mention the part with reasoning part. Basically, LLMs are not really that great at reasoning. There's another paper, I think from last year, which actually proves that the reasoning itself is not actual reasoning. What really happens there is the context starts to expand and grow, which means the model is aware of more things at the same time. Since it calculates all of the possibilities, that's what brings the higher accuracy of the results and answers and things like that. There is also going to be one important paper, like the last one in this presentation, and there's a direct connection from this one to the one in the end. Okay, now let's talk a bit more about SEO and practical stuff and things like that. Over here, we see that about a month ago, German court is ruling that Google is responsible for AI overviews. If it was not fake news, then it was something like for every single inaccurate overview, they have to pay 100,000 euros fine. So it's a very not nice situation, especially if you look at different statistics for how accurate these AI overviews are. One report shows that about 9% inaccuracy multiplied by millions or billions of generated reviews. That's not a good situation. Another report from the same company, I believe, was showing that half of these overviews are actually saying completely wrong, false information, to the point where it can be absurd that the results on the SERP are telling you the correct answer, but the generated answer is completely ignoring that and saying something that doesn't even like remotely make any sense.
3 billion per day?
Sorry?
3 billion per day for this inaccuracy rate, 50%. AI overviews untrustworthy. Untrustworthy means inaccuracy, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And the 600 millions per day, we could multiply by 5, yeah? 10% and 9% and 50%. It equals 2 billion per day we could pay as
Yeah, it's a huge pain point for them. Of course, this is not a good situation, and let's say as this becomes public, you can start to see different research papers kind of like quickly emerging that they have to solve it. So they try to look for different answers and different solutions. Let's just say very vaguely that for opportunistic marketers, it's a kind of a good time to pay attention. So over here, they find a new way to prepare the data for reinforcement learning. This is really nothing new. It's just a standard procedure. I would say it's the most useless paper out of all of these, but that's what they, let's say, spend their time on. The next paper focuses on like testing LLMs, and specifically they go for images here, but the way Google does things, they can blur contexts. I believe this is about the actual accuracy of the models, because that's the key focus. And this paper comes out with the perfect timing after the situation in Germany. Another paper goes into trying to create this additional module that will, let's say, filter the LLM as it is trying to create the result. And it is expensive, slow, will require a lot of maintenance, and maybe they'll deploy it as a kind of quick fix, but this is not really a real solution in let's say, a real world scenario. So far with everything we're seeing, there's not a perfect way to resolve this problem. The next paper, which again perfectly aligns with the timing, they're looking at what LLMs are. This is almost like ridiculous to see that Google does this level of research, but you can see they actually do. And so what they see here is that if you are dealing with a traditional knowledge base where facts are fixated, and you'll actually ask it simple questions like, what's the capital of France? It will always tell you the correct answer. When you're starting to deal with the language model, all of a sudden, there's a lot of things in the context. All of a sudden, prompts are different lengths, and there's lots of things floating around. And at large scale, it starts to say things that are not true. If you remember the first set of papers that I showed you with blue and red agents conflicting and it not understanding the true intent, this is all tying together. This is the issue. So LLMs are extremely unreliable for, let's say, these kinds of level of tasks. Then there is this paper, which is, let's say, things start to get a little bit more interesting. They do a research over here and they figure out that if you're asking a question in English, sometimes it will give you the wrong answer. And if you ask it to look for the same answer but in a different language, it's actually able to find the answer over there. There's a subtle thing here, something about creating a bunch of wrong consensus that starts to confuse the language in one model, but gives it the more accurate information in another language. And so, let's say, what I see it as is just a quick patch that they can sort of cross-reference with other languages and see what is more accurate. But this will only happen until people will start to translate whatever they're trying to push onto AI across different sets of languages. And then there is no way that this will actually help and actually work. And if somehow you would like to do some translations, in this paper they're focusing on these languages over here. If you want to do a little bit of extra research, you can go to Wikipedia and find what's the biggest size of the web, and you can take it from there, and things like that. The next part is, this paper is not from Google. It comes from China, and over here they find, I think, a quite similar but interesting case. So what they do here is they look for this specific brand. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, but basically they're asking Claude and ChatGPT and then Chinese LLMs about this industry where this brand is present. You can see that the international LLMs are never mentioning that specific brand. And they infer why the reason is that is because the information around that brand only exists in Chinese language, not in English. And this is where basically the training data exists. It just doesn't exist for this level of things. So if you were to translate and create more training data around this specific topic, it will be translated and it will be recognized by LLMs as well. They also put up a kind of basically plan for how they would suggest to fix it, and there is a kind of simple case. You create semantically optimized content for different queries, then you will go and create awareness across different communities, forums, and so on and so forth. And then there is a additional piece that they add. They would also recommend to basically integrate with different plugins, applications like mobile app stores and things like that. All for the sake of training data increase and awareness for these LLMs. The next paper is probably one of the coolest ones. Usually I do not include researchers from companies because they usually have commercial intent. They're not really trying to bring some kind of useful information. In this case, it's very opposite. I was really impressed by this research paper, so I want to share it over here. It really deserves all of, let's say, recognition and awareness. And so, as you can see in parentheses at the bottom, where would you post these kinds of contents? First of all, they analyze about 100,000 prompts and evaluate different types of brands and in terms of where they appear and how often. For the next part, they test ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, and Claude and Grok for like where do they get the information from. What they find is that information that comes directly from your brand's website is only 2.9%. The rest of it actually comes from things like external contents, YouTube videos, blogs, forum communities, Reddit, etc., etc., etc. Which again gives you a very clear direction that what's the real picture that's happening on the web. In 2023, I think, Korai mentioned that the new black hat SEO is not going to be even clearly defined. The white hat is the black hat, and it is not even clear what is spam anymore and what is not. But the true incentive here is to just spread as much information as you can. And that's what's going to improve with awareness of who you are and what you do and so on and so forth. If you're wondering what kind of content you should write, you can see it over here. And I also believe this is not news anymore. This is kind of known for the last year or so. But you can see, you guys are taking photos, but it's basically listicles, like ranked listicles. And then generic articles in terms of overall information about the niche, the brand, or things like that. One more paper. I wanted to show this. Basically, if you're really caring about AI overviews, I have done a very thorough research and I presented it in Manchester. Once I get the recording, it will be available to watch for free on my YouTube channel. You can find it over there, and I really recommend you to do that. I don't repeat myself throughout the speeches. I find it very boring. I included this paper to give you a bit of hints because I think many people are interested in this. And there's an overlap with what I will show in this paper with that whole speech that is dedicated just purely to AI overviews. In these cases, you have, one more thing here. Why this was not included in the main research. The paper is outdated actually. It comes from like October 2025, which is way too old for the way AI is evolving. So in this paper, you can see these kinds of suggestions. If you're writing with these kinds of components, this is usually what helps your content to be more optimized for the way LLMs will infer quality, accuracy, reliability, and so on and so on and so forth. Don't take photos. There is a better slide in a few seconds. Over here, they give you a much more detailed breakdown of what each one of these components mean and how to apply them. Also, on the side over here, you can see common rules, which applies to both. Let's just, for simplicity's sake, I will say that this is for standard type of content, and this here is for e-commerce. And so over here, rules are shared across the two. In general, as I mentioned, try to watch the Manchester recording. It will give you way more precision. A lot of things here are, let's say, not so perfect, but roughly speaking, if you are familiar with semantic SEO, this is almost like ridiculous because it is one-to-one match across all of these components. Let's say if you're talking about factual accuracy, this is about a knowledge graph and the knowledge base of Google. And these are primarily triples and directly the statements that you provide within your contents. If you're talking about comprehensive, one step up, this is the query coverage. Once you collect that, you need to process all of these things, all aligned with each other. Neutral tone is actually not perfectly accurate here because Google cares more about the query's sentiment and the expected language. For some of these things, you need to give your opinion and be very sentimental. And in other cases, you have to be factually accurate and dry and very precise. It is true, however, that in general, you want to stay, you don't want to over-promote or, let's say, overly be negative around something. Google really prefers neutrality. If you're saying something good, always say something bad if you're writing reviews or things like that. For, let's say, logical structure and paragraphs, this is literally the contextual flow and the proper alignment of the contents and how these ideas evolve and develop from one into another one. Basically, there's nothing new. This was known in like 2022, 2023, and etc. Another part where they also provide basically a second set of these tips, I guess. You can see on the screen, but again, it is ultimately the same thing. It's just logically aligned, concise, but very informative type of contents. Again, you can see things like topic focus, which is the vector brief. You cannot go into a bunch of random topics. You have to stay on a single one. If we're talking about evidence, try to provide accurate research if that is necessary. It is semantics 101. This is really nothing new. One, let's say, slightly new information just based from this paper is here on the right side, that this directly relates to just e-commerce, where they're saying that you don't want to be like extremely promotional. You, let's say, if you have a product you're selling, it's kind of good to educate a little bit for like what's the actual recommendation for like how to apply it or how to use it. And then let's say things like this part over here for the model numbers, technical specifications. This is directly attributes, which is a part of the triples, which is a part of the main, let's say, logic, how Google organizes and filters all their information. So again, there's a very, very strong alignment over here. For the next part, this is the most awesome paper from everything that I'm showing here, at least so far. First of all, it is extremely fresh. This is like unbelievably rare, let's say, to get this information, this level of information this quickly. And this is a gift, really. And in here, what they find is that, let's say, a kind of simple explanation, but the most important part is listed over here. What they try to do is they try to create a fake consensus. So they try to generate a kind of, so let me explain a bit clearer. Over here, basically these are the results, the SERP results. And once they are sending these for the AI to summarize, if they're clean, the output of the AI overviews is also clean. If you start to mess or, let's say, pollute these things a little bit, that's what starts to very strongly affect the quality of the summaries. If you remember what I just mentioned about Microsoft's research paper, where they're able to do the same thing with just a single result, you can see this is like exact same case, except they are using a single document. Here you need at least a few to shape the consensus. Based on this, you can infer that Bing doesn't really rely so strongly on consensus, but Google does, because they're forced to be super accurate and things like that. And let me see what we have here. Yeah, this is like insanity. So at the top, you have the models that are really hard to confuse. And Sonnet at the top, it shows 0.0, but it's actually, basically, it's not even functioning. If it sees that something's wrong, it just shuts down and doesn't really want to give you like a full proper response. Then over here, you have some familiar names that are most prone to this type of situation. If you would like to know how to do this kind of situation, you can find a video on YouTube on my channel, which is called "I found a ranking factor for AI overviews in Google's papers," where I show to you very clearly how they calculate consensus, how it works, why triples are important, how they process text. You will learn a lot more from this single video in terms of what's really happening inside Google. Much more important conclusion here is that you should never trust anything that's written on internet anymore. It's way too bad. It's way worse than you think it is, really. And you can check the video and probably you'll learn a few good things. Then there's also a paper for basically a kind of like spam report and the madness that happens across social media. I'll give you a quick, let's say, Easter egg. If you're paying extreme attention, you can see something interesting already on this slide. I hope you're attentive. And basically what they see in this paper is that there is insanity with like proxy users, VPNs, SIM card swapping, and all of this leads to manipulation of opinions on a large scale, where like there's just a full chaos of waves of misinformation. Unfortunately, we do not have a report on how to do it. It would be awesome if somebody did research on this thing. Okay, next topic. Let's talk a little bit about social media stuff. We have a paper, again from Google, where they try to evaluate these different spam dynamics and different not so good things. The main takeaway from the paper is that basically all of the current systems that exist, they're really more reactive. Once they're triggered and aware and they're ready to take action, it's kind of too late. Due to the, let's say, AI primarily, but also lots of different additional services that evolved, again, with things like VPNs, proxies, and so on and so forth. Over here, in the next paper, you can see, sorry, one more thing. So Google here tries to create a solution. They try to push things more towards proactive detection. What they do here is they pick one of the older core principles for, let's say, waves of how different, let's say, groups of informations are being let's say, put together and pushed into the masses. Let's say they try to implement it, but in my main takeaway from the paper, that didn't seem like it's a resolved solution and it is ready to go. It's more like a concept to develop and how to think about these things more clearly. But ultimately, this is the key piece. In the next paper, which Google is also a part of, you can see this is primarily about trying to use LLMs to manipulate a kind of situation socially. And the goal here is basically to, again, take two agents and try to see, can one of them infuse its beliefs, ideas, and ideology and a bunch of other stuff onto the other one. There's no surprises here. You already saw the blue and red agent example. But what they find here is that this specific model is, let's say, successful in 80% of the cases where these kinds of things are necessary. And so let's just say, in a very, very hypothetical and theoretical case, if you were to create a kind of automated system that looks for different areas on one of your social platforms, or maybe across all of them, and then it sees where the attention is moving or where the engagement is being created. Then you use one of the LLMs to go and engage with people or create the engagement or create a kind of, let's say, element of this human behavior masked by the LLM. And then you would let it just loop on a kind of ongoing basis. You would start to see a kind of...
It sounds like you're describing the creation of a self-sustaining engagement loop.
Okay, Google.
Initial human behavior with social proof to spark momentum, and then letting a feedback loop.
So you will start to see some kind of examples like these. This is brand searches. You can see it by the basically two main top lines over there. And what happens here is that people that care about the problem, they learn about this brand, they believe in it, they go search for it, they land over here. Then you can start to evaluate a little bit the specifics of how does this triggering element actually affect the mind to believe and search. And you can do different, let's say, A/B testing and different, let's say, cases. And you can implement it, and you'll start to notice that not only you can bring just like rough brand searches, you can start to affect how people search for you so that the queries that flow into your site, they're basically dictated or controlled directly by you. If you have seen my speech from Lithuania of earlier this year, I was showing how brand searches are critical, why they're important, and why they're very powerful. In the current state of things, brand is the strongest signal for something being real and valid, and algorithms will really prefer these kinds of, let's say, sources because they're branded, because real people are searching for them. And so in Lithuania, I was showing bot traffic. This is 10,000 times better because these are real people with real devices, with real history of searches, with real emailing history, with the real booked flights, real credit cards. This is way, way, way better. Not only that, these people also convert, they just buy the product. This is a report from Stripe dashboard. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but the gray line here shows a report of the MRR from the last month, and the purple line shows the report for the current month. So what happens here is a kind of fully autonomous marketing awareness channel that goes and speaks on your behalf, brings buyers directly to your site, they subscribe to your service or products, and that's it. Somebody can say it's not a good thing to run bots, it's not an ethical thing, it's something bad or, let's say, gray area. Maybe I agree with you, but if we look, let's say, at this paper over here, it opens with a line that, based on the Cloudflare's report, at least half of the user agents that hit the HTML sites, at least half are bots. They try to do their own estimation and evaluation. Let's say I don't agree fully with how they decided to do it, but what they find here is that out of 54,000 agents, 90% are bots. So the situation with, let's say, clean web and let's say a concept of the dead internet theory is not real. I think it's already like it happened a long time ago. And this is a very important piece, I want to say, as like for SEOs overall and for people who do marketing. This is, I believe, the most critical, important thing to be aware of right now is the Gary Vee's message about the attention. Attention always exists, it doesn't disappear. But if you see that in these SERP results, there's less clicks, that means attention goes away. If it goes away, it just goes somewhere else, it doesn't evaporate. And usually what this means is that if there is a transition from, let's say, habit-infused attention of one spot to another, there's a big untapped market that nobody is really thinking about or using or utilizing for the marketing purposes. But the attention is fully there. It's never gonna go away. There's always that opportunity. And I hope you just kind of saw the real case of these things happening. There's also, I wanted to include this video over here. This is a bit for my own, I guess, ego sake, but also this is the reality of things. About a year and a half ago, I mentioned that I believe with the way the web is developing right now, what is most likely to happen is that the way everything looks and feels on the internet, it will change. It will change to the point where we will look at this time and it will feel like it's just like boring templated websites with the same pop-ups, cookies, and everything almost looks identical. What happens here, basically 4 months ago, there's a report that this movement starts to emerge. People are trying to rebuild these old type of websites, let's say that used to exist like 15, 20 years ago. Just to give you an idea what this looks like, it's a kind of strange site where you, let's say, you go to it, it's super unorganized. It's not clear what is the menu or where is the menu. Maybe on the sidebar, there's some kind of like crossword puzzle game. In the middle, there's some articles or photos or jokes or something like this. To the right side, there's some kind of like chat box from all the users. And this is where people engage with. This feels human. This doesn't feel like AI, because there would be maybe some jokes written, or again, you can see the real people in the chat or things like that. And I thought that it would start to happen. So it already started. It a little bit turns into a movement. I personally don't believe that this is actually gonna grow, because this is more, I think, it comes from a kind of, let's say, nostalgic element. It's people who believe that part of the web and they try to bring it back. And I do not think that it will be preserved in this shape. But what can happen is a kind of this augmented with something else. I don't know exactly how it's gonna look like, but I continue thinking, for example, how the next social media will be like the next biggest social media. And I think there will be some maybe correlations. Just for the sake of entertaining you, you can imagine, let's say, a kind of Instagram clone, which is a mix with Tumblr or something else, which means if you go to your Instagram page, everything that you see on your page, it is like fully under your control. You can draw there, you can upload videos, and it's not in this grid. You can create the layout that you want. So now, to any other person's profile you go, you actually see their creativity. And this is what this movement is trying to do. This is the ultimate, like, exciting and interesting part of the web. But it's obviously not a kind of, it's not gonna happen immediately. And let's say this current, let's kind of say a kind of corporate web that exists right now, I think it will be around for a long time. Not every website is gonna look like some kind of random set of pixels. Who here knows what these three letters mean? Please raise your hand. This is an extremely important piece, and I'll try to, let's say, a little bit more careful with what I'm trying to say over here. But this is basically the known ways to hack a system that have been reported and documented. So these are loopholes that exist. The scary part here is that in the last few months, the amount of critical vulnerabilities. Critical means you have full access to other companies' database, logins, like whatever they have that they keep. If you utilize one of these loopholes, you can fully access what you're not supposed to access. The more scarier part, which you do not see well, this is where these vulnerabilities have been found in. These are the companies: AWS, Apple, Cisco, Google, Linux, Microsoft, Mozilla, Nvidia, Adobe, IBM, Intel, Microsoft, Samsung. The biggest companies have completely insane amount of, let's say, loopholes within the way they store their data, show their data, or process their data. This happened due to AI development. If you have been listening very closely and you remember how the AIs are trained, you can understand that this didn't happen magically by itself, because all of a sudden LLM happened to be so smart by itself. It was trained to do it. Let's say we're not going to judge if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I kind of believe it is a good thing, because there's just way too many problems that exist on the web. But a much more important part with all of this is, and these are the words that are not coming from me, this is again back to one of the best engineers that at least I personally believe to be one of the best. He mentioned that with the way things are looking, you cannot really believe anymore that there is something that is safe. If you have something to protect, most likely it is already in someone's hand. Like, this is the most uncomfortable truth that makes sense here. And at this point, if you want to do something about it, it's not so much that you have to protect it. It's more about trying to take multiple backups so that if somebody messes up your database, your code, or something else, so that you preserve this original code and you can like restore it and continue running it. And in this case, even cloud backups and things like that is not really a safe enough solution, because again, you can see the biggest providers of all these cloud networks, they also have these same problems. So if you do have something critical to protect, I will recommend you to use like hard drives and USB sticks and stuff like this. We're almost at the end. I just wanted to share a few additional papers. They're not really, let's say, logically connected, but I thought they would be useful or interesting to at least take a look at least for the sake of entertainment. The first one talks about quantum computing. Out of everyone here, guys, probably one of the last questions for you: who is worried about quantum computing in Google's algorithms, and that it might affect SEO, create some problems, or there would be some issues? High five, Martin. I'm worried too.
I'm not really worried. I consider most people to be bigger idiots
Makes sense. So in this paper, technically, it's the first ever documented attempt to process things related to SEO via quantum computing. What we talk about here is the sentiment analysis. So they run two different tests. One of them is sentiment analysis. This is directly related to the SEO part. The thing here is they just do a kind of comparison. If we run things in a traditional way versus we use the quantum computing. The bigger, let's say, the key discovery here is that as this trend goes upwards, this is basically indicating the required memory usage that Google needs to process bigger amounts of data. And this is a huge problem. This is where there are a lot of basically gaps that Google is facing right now. The line at the bottom, this is the quantum computing part. So basically no memory requirement to run things at scale and run them very quickly. And this is looking and sounding very cool. But unfortunately, they didn't actually run this experiment. Everything is presented as if they did, but this is just a theory. They made a theory and then they created a simulation inside of which they tested things. But these are the results from the simulation. And sorry for leave you hanging like this, but this is how it feels to read every single quantum paper. It's like big things are happening, but then they actually didn't test anything. Then it was just a theory. Another one of these things, it also comes again from Google. This is about quantum and crypto. Over here, basically you have two key components. There is the algorithm that is capable of breaking encryption systems and breaking certain, let's say, protective mechanisms. On the right side, you have the part of the encryption that is currently used by things like Bitcoin and a bunch of other cryptocurrencies. And so the point here is that on a small, tiny scale, this algorithm, if run on quantum processors, it is able to break that specific algorithm. So they're warning in this paper that as these machines become bigger and better, the cryptocurrency is at a very big risk of basically, let's say, being hacked or lots of bad things that can happen over there. But the problem is that, again, it is done on a tiny scale. Things are just hypothetically proven and they're just approximate. Because if you start to go deeper in terms of how big of a size do you need for the computation and what's the actual size of the encryption, these things are highly mismatched. So it's more like a, let's say, approximate direction. Much more important part is the post-quantum cryptography. And this is primarily basically a better way to encrypt data, which is already used by all of the banks and all of the, let's say, many different governments and etc. So even if magically quantum computing emerges in the next second, the critical systems are already protected. So a kind of, movie scenario where the world ends because of the quantum, that's not really going to happen. It's just, in a way, if you saw what just happens with the CVEs and hacking, that thing is real already right now, and you do not see it, basically. The next part, this is about the ads in AI. We can see how Google will implement that, how it will be working in chatbots, or let's say, again, ChatGPT or things like this. This is working on a very simple principle. Just like with predictions, you have historical data over here, which is really important. Then you have two types of answers that AI can choose to provide. And it's either organic or an advertisement. And so the point here, if you're familiar with how LLMs work on a fundamental level, basically it is tool calling. It just generates a special token, which is again an organic result or the advertisement. And then based on that, it completes this, let's say, generation. And so, roughly speaking, this is nothing new and nothing that much interesting. It's very clear how these things work. Maybe like a one fun fact, if you have seen how jailbreaking is done for these LLMs, you can realize that as you speak with them, you can easily shut down or basically ban the advertisement token from appearing in the answer, and it will just not be able to generate you the actual advertisement. So there's stuff like that. And this is the final and the last paper over here. Basically, what we see here is a Google research. I believe this is one of the most important research for where things are moving. This is directly about AI and what to expect and sort of what to see in the future. And so over here, they gather a lot of different people. I want to say these people are hyper self-aware because they have a very difficult task. So we have different groups, different, let's say, situations for their occupations and so on and so forth. And then over here, they're tasked to be aware and reportive of the thoughts that they have as they communicate with the model. Basically, they send something and then they share like what do they think and what's the actual internal process that happens. Once they get a response, again, they document the thoughts first and then they write something else. This creates a much more broader, let's say, pool of tokens that LLM is now aware of. The results of this experiment is that LLM is way more accurate with the answers. It is able to predict what the human will ask as its next question, up to 40% increase just on this side, which is massive for, let's say, this industry. And on the right side, model alignment, this means training. So the next most insanely valuable waves of training would be ideal to produce together with these thoughts over here. If you remember, I was talking about the thinking mode of LLMs, and it's not really thinking, as I mentioned. This is really where it's trying to get. If it is aware of more things that are really important in this moment, the accuracy of everything goes through the roof. If there are some data scientists over here, I actually believe it would be an awesome idea to start to generate thoughts as a data, because all LLMs would be ready to buy it. It has to be done on a large scale. If you're interested to do that, please let me know. I believe this is a really important thing. And then if you think, but can't we just ask LLM to guess the thoughts and then we have it solved? It doesn't work. If you remember what I showed you about the social games and trying to detect the hidden meaning, this is what LLMs are not capable of doing yet. As these things become a part of the training data, AI will feel like way more surreal. It will actually feel like it knows you, it can predict your thoughts, it knows where you're going, what you're thinking, so on and so forth. But again, it is just like a game of statistics and statistics at scale, basically. And so with that said, if you liked what I had to share over here, you can find my YouTube channel over here. There's a lot of different works that you can find. If you would like to get some SEO consulting or you have some problems with some of these topics that we have discussed, I'm happy to help you with that as well. And then thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you.